Hello and welcome to our program. My name is David Wetzel and I am the producer of this afternoon's program with the Chicago Ensemble. Welcome to our first virtual education program for fall of 2020. Before we begin, I'd like to mention a few things. First of all, this is the first of 3 virtual programs. Our next program will be in 2 weeks. It's Saturday, November 7th at 4 p.m. Central Time. And that program, the theme will be 20th Century Music Masters, or 20th Century Masters of Innovation. And that's music for clarinet, violin, and piano. And then the next program will be 2 weeks after that. Saturday, November 21st at 4 p.m. also Central Time. And that one is titled Masterpieces of the Classical Era, and it will feature music for violin, cello, and piano. Also, before we begin, we will have a question and answer feature available. So in this Zoom webinar, you have a Q&A button on your Zoom controls. And if you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, you may do so by text in the Q&A box. Your questions will be seen only by the panelists, not by other participants, unless one of the panelists can answer your question. And if you'd like to have it answered publicly, please indicate so in your question. And if we can answer your question, we will, and then other participants will be able to see your question and answer. If you would prefer a private answer, please give us your email address also, and we can follow up and email you later. In either case, in case we don't get to your question in time, please give us your email address or send your questions to us directly by email to theceweb@thechicagoensemble.org. Okay, and without further ado, we should meet our panelists for today. We have 3 panelists joining us. We have Elizandro Garcia-Montoya, who's a clarinetist. We have Michelle Areyzaga, who is a soprano singer. And we have Gerald Rizzer, a pianist. And let's meet them, shall we? All right, so our first panelist, Elizandro Garcia-Montoya, is a native of Costa Rica. He began playing clarinet at the age of 9. Mr. Garcia-Montoya is an active chamber musician in the Chicago area. And in addition to performing regularly with the Chicago Ensemble, he plays also with numerous chamber groups and orchestras in Chicago and beyond. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, David, for a nice introduction. I am very excited to be here to talk to you guys about this beautiful instrument called the clarinet, and also this amazing music that you're about to hear. So thank you for having me.
Okay, so our next panelist is Michelle Areyzaga. Hello. Ms. Areyzaga is a classical singer. She is a recording artist, vocal teacher here in Chicago, and she's performed operatic roles in New York and Chicago and beyond. She frequently sings with chamber groups and sings songs and other chamber music with smaller groups, also here in Chicago and all over the world. So again, welcome.
Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here in my cozy home, right in my nook where I do all my practicing and my teaching. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And then finally, we have Gerald Rizzer, who is the founder and artistic director of the Chicago Ensemble, and he will be your host for the remainder of this program. Mr. Rizzer teaches piano, theory, and ensemble at the Sherwood Community Music School here in Chicago, and for many years he also taught at DePaul University. He has written music for numerous shows and has 3 CDs of his piano music available. Welcome to the program, Mr. Rizzer.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the nice introduction and for doing the production of this first program, which I'm looking forward to greatly, particularly since I'm glad to have these 2 performers who are, as I think you all agree, outstanding and they have stuck with me with very little pay for a
Right.
lot of years.
And it's my pleasure to be with you. And I'm going to step into the background now, everyone, and I will be helping make the program run, but I'm going to be off camera for the rest of the show. So welcome to our guests, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, David. And I just want to say, Jerry, it's so nice to see you, and Elizandro.
Yeah,
This is as close as we can get to playing together during these times, right?
yeah,
Right.
it's
I
In
miss
fact,
you.
I mean, I put this program together because I was able to draw from a lot of things that we've done together, because you kids out there and everybody else realizes that we cannot actually be in the same room performing. So
Right.
we've done a lot of programs together and a
yeah.
lot of good performances that I was able to bring together for this program.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you,
Jerry.
Jerry.
I'm always very happy to be called to play your concerts because you always find very interesting music for us to perform, and that's how I met Michelle. And it has been such a wonderful collaboration over the years. And you hear a lot of beautiful sounds from the voice and the clarinet, all mixing together
I
beautifully.
didn't tell you that you're going to be sight reading a new piece.
Great. Oh, Jerry.
Okay, I
All
think
right.
we'll go on with our program. You'll see both Alessandro and Michelle a little bit later in the program. They will show you their instruments, of course. In the case of Michelle, she'll open her mouth. But we are members of the Chicago Ensemble. I created that group 44 years ago. That's probably longer ago than some of your parents are alive. At any rate, at the time, I wondered what I should name it. And so the Chicago Ensemble seems like a very kind of a generic name, right? Well, the reason I did it, I said, well, I want people to say, oh, the Chicago Ensemble, yeah, I've heard of it, when of course they hadn't. But 44 years later, there's still people who say that and they haven't. But I'm glad that you are hearing us today. We have a series of 5 programs, in case you do want to hear us. Every year, 5 programs and 2 locations in Chicago. And you can go to our website for greater details. As already indicated, what you're going to be, the music you're going to be hearing is drawn from CDs of our live performances over the years. Today's program spans from the Renaissance to the present time. And the Renaissance, in case you're getting out your Google search engine here, but we're talking roughly 500 years for one of the pieces on this program. It's, however, not the first piece. We're going to actually begin with a piece by a German composer named Ludwig Spohr, and he lived at the beginning of the 1800s. So did another famous Ludwig, and that's Ludwig van Beethoven. I'm sure you've heard of him, although I certainly don't fault you for not hearing about Spohr. He was popular in his time, but not so well known nowadays. I see you're now looking at a picture of him, and it's quite impressive because Mr. Spohr did that as a self-portrait of himself. So I think he did a nice job. And I think he did a nice job on the music you're going to hear. It's one of 6 settings for voice and clarinet and piano. Of course, the text is in the language that they spoke, which is German. And the poem is about, well, it has 2 halves. The first half, beginning with a big flourish by the clarinet, is dramatic and serious, and in minor. With a small change to major, the mood lightens up. And that's because the first half of the poem says, I'm in despair. I have to keep this secret. I can't tell anybody how unhappy I am. And in the second half, it says, but there's a place where I can find peace and communicate love to others. So, of course, you'll hear it in German, but you'll see the translation in English. One of the challenges of being a singer is that you have to be able to sing in all the different languages that the composer wrote in and make it meaningful to the audience. I think Michel is always terrific at conveying the meaning to the audience. Here is the first piece by Ludwig Spohr. So this is beautiful music, I think, especially when you consider that most people don't even know, most musicians don't even know anything written by this fellow, Spohr. But I think it's a lovely piece. And I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe you could pick up on the change in mood when the music also changed from minor to major. Also, maybe you were listening carefully to the way that the voice and the clarinet interacted. So you heard the clarinet play a big flourish in the beginning, answered by the voice, back and forth for a little while, and then they were playing together. The piano, however, doesn't play anything prominent. It is the accompanist. That is, it's playing chords that support the melodies that the other two instruments are playing. We turn now to completely different music. In the year 1492, which I'm sure you'll recognize as the year that Columbus set sail from Spain to the New World, not knowing he was going to get to the New World. In that same year, there was a decree that said that anybody in Spain who is not a Christian has to leave. So that meant all the Jewish people who lived in Spain went to other countries. As they emigrated, they took with them their folk songs, songs that they had been singing traditionally in the form of Spanish of the time, which is called Ladino, and passed those songs on generation to generation till the present time, when a Spanish composer named Manuel Valls took the melody of one of these songs and he gave it a beautiful setting, which we would call an arrangement. So being an arranger is a very creative thing also. You can impose your own taste and sense of character of the music when you do an arrangement. There is a part in this music for clarinet and voice, also one for flute, but no piano in this one. At a certain point, well, here's the rough translation. Your mother, when she brought you up, intended you to love me, not another. So, my beloved, I must say farewell. So when it says farewell, the word in Spanish is adio. And at that point, the music goes into a somewhat different character from the first half. So there are two halves to the song, and the song is sung twice. Here is Adio, a song of the Spanish Jews of the Renaissance, usually called Sephardic Jewish people of Spain. A haunting melody, don't you think? And so beautifully played. Yes, you think it was beautifully played, Alessandro?
I'll have to agree, yes. I've forgotten how beautiful that piece is.
Yeah, so of course, this is a couple of years maybe since we've played this together, they've played it together because I'm not in it. But it's nice to hear some of the things we've done over the years. If you noticed, just before the Adio, the last line of the first half was repeated, and also the second half, the Adio half, the last line just before the end is repeated as well. And when Michel sang the repeat of both of those sections, she sang it quieter the second time, which I think was quite beautiful. So that was an example of the folk music of the Spanish Jews of the Renaissance. Now we're not going to hear exactly a folk song, but we're going to hear a piece by an early 20th century, that is about 1900, British composer. And he liked to use English folk songs in his music, or to write music, which is the case here, which resembles English folk songs, even if it's not. Now, this is number 2 of 3 short pieces, and don't strain yourself trying to figure out the words, because yes, it's true the guy speaks English, but this is not in English, it's nothing, it's a vocalese. So don't strain yourself, it's all on a single syllable. That's called a vocalese. And in a way, it's a good thing in this case, because it makes the soprano sort of on the same level as the clarinet, like a second instrument, instead of concentrating on the meaning of the text. And as such, the two interweave with the same kinds of ideas. And also, I suggest you do not go to the refrigerator now to get a Coke, because by the time you get back, the piece will be over. It's very short. So here it is. It's by Ralph Vaughan Williams. At this point, first of all, did you enjoy that little piece? You didn't go to the refrigerator? It's very charming, and you could hear how the two, instrument and voice, interweave. At this point, we're going to have a demonstration of the two colleagues. First, Elizandro will talk about the clarinet, and then Michelle will talk about being a singer, an opera and art song singer. So let's start with Elizandro, and then we'll go on with Michelle.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And that's a beautiful piece by Vaughan Williams. So if you notice, the range of the clarinet and the soprano are about the same. And actually, this is called the soprano clarinet, or the B-flat clarinet. So the first one was made in Germany around 1700 by a fellow named Johann Denner. But that first instrument only had a few keys, only 2 or 3 keys. So if you can imagine, it was a very limited instrument. It could only play a few notes. Also, the volume was very limited. So in a way, it wasn't really that much of a popular instrument. But if you notice, this clarinet is what we have today. And we have silver keys that I press up and down. But I was gonna say, the clarinet's the youngest member of the woodwind family. But I play with a single reed. You can notice here, it's basically a piece of wood that has a flat side to it that I clip to the top of the instrument. I clip it to the mouthpiece, and when I blow across the reed vibrates against the mouthpiece and produces a sound. Now, this instrument is definitely, well, one of the main improvements they did to the clarinet was the register key, this key in the back, which was the makers were experimenting in the positioning of that, and they figured out that they placed it a little bit higher, they could get to a different register. And then all of a sudden the clarinet became a very flexible instrument. You could play a lot more notes, and you could also play very soft and very loud. And that then the clarinet became very popular, not only in classical music, but also in jazz and popular music from all over the world. So I would like to demonstrate the sound of the clarinet by playing a short segment of a solo written for the clarinet by Meyer Kupferman, who is a composer we're going to feature also in our next program. And this piece is called Sounds, Spells for Fantasy. Sounds, Spells, Fantasy. And I want you to pay attention to that huge range of notes that the clarinet has, and also how I can play very soft and also fairly loud. That is the sound of the clarinet.
And a beautiful sound it was, and is. The clarinet was the last of the family of what we call woodwinds. There are four woodwinds that are the main part of the wind section of an orchestra. And that's a flute, which of course you're going to say, why is it a woodwind when it's not even made of wood? That's true, but at the time they brought them all together up till the 1800s. The flute was made of wood, and then the orchestra was larger and larger, and it was harder for a wooden instrument to cut across the rest of the sound, so they began to make them out of metal. The other two instruments you probably know are the oboe and the bassoon. And there are only a couple of each in an orchestra. I'm sure you've been to a concert. If not, next time you get a chance to look on YouTube, you'll see in an orchestra there are just a couple of woodwinds, 2 or 3 of each instrument, while there may be 20, 25 string players. And of course, that means that the wind players are almost soloists. It also means that the competition for a job with a major orchestra is very fierce. So at this point, I'd like us to consider the voice. The voice is, of course, the most basic instrument, and Michelle is going to tell you some things about it. As you know, Michelle has sung both opera and art songs. So opera came about starting around 1600 with the Baroque period. And it's, of course, just a play with music. Art song is usually meant to be a singer, one singer, with a piano accompaniment. And it becomes popular around 1800, which is about the same time that the piano itself gets to its present refinement. So here's Michelle to tell you about singing.
Hi, everyone. I just want to tell you about my instrument. It's an instrument that each of you also has. It is right here. It's the voice. When I was very young, my parents allowed me to have piano lessons, and that is when I learned to read music. My parents were interested in music also. They were volunteer church musicians, and they took me to some classical music concerts, similar to how you are attending a classical music concert, a different kind today with your family. And I also, as I became a little bit older, got to sing in the choir. And I am a soprano. That is my voice part. That is the highest category. We have bass is the lowest, usually men. Tenor, which is the second lowest. Then you have the alto. Sometimes it's called a mezzo-soprano. Then you have a soprano. And that's the part that you hear usually on the top part. So my vocal range goes all the way from here to about here. And I've performed those in different situations on stage. I fell in love with classical singing specifically because of how much of the vocal range it uses. Also because it uses a very big range of emotions. I'm grateful to be able to sing in many different languages, music from several different countries, and also music that spans many different centuries. And one of the cool things about being a classical singer is you don't need a microphone. I think that's pretty cool. One of my favorite parts about my job as a professional singer is something called collaboration. And you've heard this word used earlier by Elizandro. It's a big fancy word that basically means working together. When I perform, I get to work together with many other musicians of different sorts. Sometimes it's in an opera or in an orchestral concert where I'm with several hundred people in a chorus and an orchestra. And sometimes it's just me and my musical partner like Elizandro or like Gerald Rizzer. And that's chamber music. And when I sing chamber music, that kind of song is called an art song. And I just want to show you a little example of collaboration. It's not only collaboration between me and my musical partner, but it's also collaboration with the poet, who may or may not be alive, and also with the composer, who may or may not be alive. So I have a song, just a page of a song. It's called A Water Bird. It was written for me by American composer Gwyneth Walker. It was written for me in 2002. And the author, or the poet, is someone named Rumi, who lived in the 1200s. This is what it sounds like if I just read Rumi's words. What I want is to see your face in a tree, in the sun coming out, in the air. This is what it sounds like when I sing it by myself. What I want is to see your face in a tree, in the sun coming out, in the air. And this is how it sounds when you put all four players together, except I have to be the pianist and the singer also. Here we go. Is to see your face in a tree, in the sun coming out, in the air. And that is collaboration.
And that is the first instance of a person collaborating with herself. But very nice, Michelle. Enjoyed it.
Thank
Actually,
you.
Very, very nice piece.
Thank you.
Gwyneth Walker is quite well known among American composers. And since we're all attuned to the sociology of the times, it's good to point out that she's one of the more successful women composers, women American composers. And it was interesting to hear the solo voice and then the voice with the accompaniment, because what Michelle was playing after she did the introduction was just repeated chords. the harmony, is what we would call it, and it makes a difference, of course, to the music. It's really essential to it, but although the single vocal line by itself was quite beautiful. So thank you,
Thank you,
Michelle.
Jerry. It's always better with you. You know that.
Well, you're about to hear it with me.
All right.
Because we're about to do a song with you and me by what many people consider the greatest of the composers for art songs, and that is Franz Schubert. Now, he lived at the same time as Beethoven and Spohr. In fact, he lived in the same city as Beethoven, which is Vienna, Austria, a part of a small country nowadays, but then it was the capital of a huge empire that included a lot of Central Europe. As you can see on your display there, poor Schubert lived only 31 years. And in that time, he wrote over 600 songs. Many of them are among the best songs in the literature. And of course, he also wrote instrumental music. The song we're going to hear is based on a text by Goethe. And Goethe was probably the most prominent writer of poetry and plays in German language. Actually, he was alive at the time that Schubert was. And I'm not sure whether it's just before Schubert died, at any rate, at some point his friends sent to Goethe a number of Schubert's settings of Goethe's poems. And Goethe replied that he didn't like them. And that's the way it goes. Just because you're a good poet and a good playwright doesn't mean you know anything at all about music, because these are great songs. The one you're going to hear now is from a famous work by Goethe called Faust. And in the story of Faust, Faust is an old man and he wishes he could be young again, and he makes a deal with the devil. He'll trade his soul for the chance to become young and good looking again. So that happens. He's young and good looking, and a very young woman falls in love with him. And he then goes away, but she's still infatuated with him. And in this song, she's sitting at her spinning wheel, and the piano accompaniment is imitating the sound of a spinning wheel throughout the whole song while the singer sings her line. So that's the kind of sound of the accompaniment. It builds to a high point where she's thinking how much she wanted to be with him and how unhappy she is that he's left her. So here is the song. It's Margaret at the Spinning Wheel.
Meine Ruhe ist hin, mein Herz ist schwer. Ich finde sie nimmer und Berge. Wo ich ihn nicht hab, ist mir das Grab. Die ganze Welt ist mir vergällt. Mein armer Kopf ist mir verrückt. Mein armes
So as you can hear, the spinning wheel stops at the end, it winds down, the da 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 comes to a halt. And maybe this is obvious, but it's worth mentioning and thinking about. The highest, most intense part of the song, the climax of the whole drama, is on a high note or a low note, almost always a high note. And so that point is reached actually a couple times, and then it starts over the second time, and it's even a higher climactic point. So we're going to do another art song right now. This one is by Robert Schumann. He was a few years younger than Schubert, and he's considered really probably almost as great a composer of art songs as Schubert. He also wrote a lot of other music because he was an accomplished pianist. And it says on your screen there, he was also a music critic. As such, he was able to promote the careers of others. So that's of importance here because it was Schumann who brought Schubert's music to the attention of the public, Schubert having died at a very young age without having much of his music published or known to the world except for his friends. So he does have a connection to Schubert. This song is by another, of course, this being again a German composer, German poet. The poet's name is Heinrich Heine, and the song is You Are As Beautiful as a Flower, a very tender, simple melody, beautifully lyrical, and with a simple chord-like accompaniment in the piano. So here is the song, You Are As Beautiful as a Flower.
Du bist wie eine Blume, so hold und schön und rein. Ich schau dich an und Wehmut schleicht mir ins Herz hinein. Ist, als ob ich die Hände aufs Haupt dir legen sollt. Betend, dass Gott dich erhalte, so rein und schön und
Lovely song, don't you think? Of course, a lot of the music we play was written in past times. Some of it, like the song that Michelle sang to demonstrate, and that Elizandro played, were written by composers of our present time. You could say that the test of whether it's a good piece is whether people like it still 100, 200 years after it was written. That is certainly the case in the music we're doing today. Well, the piano, as I said, has a subordinate role in some of the art songs, like the one we just heard. The piano plays chords, but the melody is sung by the soprano. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the piano, and maybe the fact that the pianist, as a collaborator with the other players in a chamber music group, has on his sheet music are all the other parts too. So he keeps track of what everybody else is doing. Of course, one hopes there's no emergency and that he has to jump or look at the other player. That, of course, has not happened in any of these performances, or I wouldn't have included them. The piano, as I said, is usually the companion in art songs. So it only came into use around 1800. What preceded it? There were other keyboard instruments. There was the organ and there was the harpsichord. Each of them has a keyboard that looks just like a piano, but the way the sound is produced is different. The harpsichord is played by a series of strings for each note that you're playing, and a little hook comes up and plucks the string when you press down the keys. It either plucks or it doesn't pluck. There's no change in loud and soft. When the piano was invented, it's different. The sound is produced by a wooden hammer with a soft covering on it, and the harder you press that hammer, the louder the sound is. It's like a teeter-totter. I press the key down, and on the other side, the hammer flips up and hits the keys. But it can play soft or loud. And as a result, it was called a piano forte. Piano means soft in, you know what language? It's the language that usually is the universal language for writing instructions so that anybody in any country can read it. That's always in Italian. And the word forte, as you can imagine, means loud. So an instrument that can play soft and loud. People got lazy and they dropped the forte part and they just call it a piano. Of course, that doesn't make any sense to say it's just a soft, but you understand where that it's an abbreviation of the original name. Besides being able to play loud and soft, certain things were necessary to be invented. One is what we call the escapement action. So when I press down a key, as I said, there's a felt hammer that hits the string. Well, if it stays in contact with the string, it's going to muffle its own sound. It's going to pop, you know, but it has to hit it and spring away right away. And that's the mechanism they had to invent for the piano. Another feature that the piano has, much in use in Schumann, for example, is the pedal. When I step on a pedal, well, here's without the pedal, and here's with the pedal. So it makes the notes sustain longer. So the piano developed just about the same time as the 1800s took place, and that period of time we call the Romantic period. We're about to listen to another German composer, Johannes Brahms, a great composer who was a few years younger than Schumann. But all of the last three composers, Brahms, Schumann, and Schubert, made generous use of the piano. One could easily say that their music could not have been played on the harpsichord successfully. As I said, Brahms was a bit younger than Schumann. And when Brahms was young, he went to visit Schumann to get some advice on composition. And I think that Schumann gave Brahms some good advice, or at least Brahms incorporated some elements of Schumann's style. But Brahms went on his own, and he wrote throughout his full career over 100 big pieces. And at that point, he decided he's going to quit. He's had enough writing composition. Maybe he was a bit depressed, but at any rate, he heard the music, the playing of a clarinetist named Mühlfeld, and he was so taken by this clarinet playing that he came back and took up his pen and wrote 4 more big pieces. 2 of them are sonatas, and then 2 chamber music pieces with 3 and 5 instruments. The clarinet itself had kind of reached maturity at the same time as the Romantic period and the piano. So not an accident that it was a clarinet that reached Brahms's attention. Okay, now we're hearing one movement from the clarinet sonata, and a movement is a self-contained part. You can listen to it on its own, which is what we're going to do, or you could listen to it the way the composer intended it, that'd be part of a set of self-contained movements. There's usually 3 or 4, and one contrasts with the other in speed or character or key. At any rate, when there are 4 movements, and this is in the 1700s, when the sonata was kind of invented as a form, as a type of piece, when in the 1700s, the 4th movement, if included, would be a minuet. Now, a minuet, of course, is a dance. It was, in fact, the most popular dance of the 1700s. But that doesn't mean that if somebody listened to a piece that had one movement that was marked minuet, they'd all get up and dance. The rhythms are such that you could, theoretically, but this music was usually a little more complicated than dance music would have been. And at any rate, it wasn't intended for the dance. In the 1800s, the minuet gave way to the waltz. So Brahms, who's writing in the mid 1800s, is writing a waltz instead of a minuet. Both of them have 3 beats. Both of them are at a moderate speed. And both of them have the same form, which is to say there's an opening part that comes back at the end, and in the middle, something different. You'll hear that. And I'm going to demonstrate the 2 types of dance movements, the minuet and the waltz. First, let's listen to a little bit of Mozart. Okay, that's a minuet from Mozart, who lived in the late 1700s. Now here's a waltz by Johann Strauss, another German composer living in Vienna, same city as Brahms at the same time. And in fact, Brahms is said to have written on a program of music they heard by Strauss, "I wish I had written that piece." So I don't know if this was the piece or not. Okay, so the waltz has a strong first beat and then 2 lifting lighter beats, and the minuet, they're more equal. So we're going to listen to the music now of the sonata, and please listen to see if you can find when the first section returns. I think it won't be too difficult. The middle section is a little more somber, and the first section, the last section, are have a little more swing to them. Okay, here it is. The other thing that I want to point out about this music, well, first of all, I hope you caught the fact that the opening music returned after a more somber middle section. And then I just wanted to show that I would not exactly call what the piano was doing in this piece an accompaniment. We were equal partners in trading off the melodic ideas. And so it would be just more or less a collaboration rather than a soloist with an accompaniment. So before we do our last piece, which is Peppy and Bluesy, I want to thank David Wetzel for producing the program. And I want to thank Miriam Leahy, who is a member of my class at Sherwood Music School, but in this case is also a board member on the Chicago Ensemble board, and she has underwritten the program, for which we're very appreciative. So we hope that you will attend a concert in Chicago when you're available and when it's safe to go out into the world. And you can find details on our website, thechicagoensemble.org. I think you can memorize that. And there's an opportunity on the website for your parents to make a contribution. The last piece then on our program is by a composer named Jack Gottlieb. He was closely associated, popularizing, arranging, editing the manuscripts and everything with another composer of greater fame, whose name is Leonard Bernstein. And Leonard Bernstein's 100th birthday was a couple of years ago, and so his music came to be a lot of attention. And as you can see on the display, he's the composer of a very famous musical, West Side Story, but he also wrote concert music. Gottlieb, this is a piece by Gottlieb. It's its own music, it's his own words. And it's called Downtown Blues for Uptown Halls. Well, Gottlieb knew New York City very well. He knew that in the downtown part of Manhattan, you have the blues and jazz clubs, and in the uptown part of Manhattan, you have the concert halls where classical music is played. So his point was, this is going to sound bluesy, but we want it to be in a concert. And there are 3 songs. His poem for the first one describes a young woman who is bored living in a small town and wants the excitement of living in New York. The second song, which is the one we're going to do, is how she lives the fast life in New York. And the third song, sadly, is when she's old and can no longer live this kind of life, has no money, and lives in a down and out hotel. The second one, as I said, is the one we're doing. It's called Impulsive. And impulsive means recklessly taking a chance on the spur of the moment. So that was how she lived in New York. You'll hear the bluesy quality to both the clarinet and vocal music, and the harmonies that the piano plays. And part of the skill of both Michelle and Elizandro is how they can slip into this style very beautifully. So here it is, Impulsive by Jack Gottlieb.
Impulsive, now you're on the way, picking up speed on demand. You're such a ball of fire with hot desire for no one, but everyone's buying your style, your bread, your guile, your hand. Sophisticated, elating all your charms, dressed like the Duchess to kill. Now you're invincible with no thought to give to the future. You'll never be over the hill. It's true that you can't for some kind of disaster. The merry-go-round you're riding, spinning ever faster. Get your grip, hold on tight, don't you slip, use your might, don't you give. You're losing your balance.
We've enjoyed this afternoon performing for you, and we hope you enjoyed the program, and that you'll tune in 2 weeks, same time, for a program of music in this revolutionary period, that is revolution in the arts, of the early 1900s. All the pieces were written about the same time. So I want to thank my colleagues here, Michelle Areyzaga,
Thank you, Jerry.
and Elizandro Garcia-Montoya, and I'm Gerald Rizzer.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, but we won't have time to answer questions today, but please send us either a Q&A typed question or send us an email. Bye-bye, we'll see you in 2 weeks. I'll bring hundreds of your friends.